full attention, care, and deliberation of each member of this body. To maintain the integrity of the process and the dignity of this chamber, I also must make it clear that the quorum is not merely requested, it is expected and will be demanded. No expressions of approval or disapproval are permitted from the floor or the gallery. Applause, verbal reactions, gestures, or disruptions of any kind are not in keeping with the gravity of this hearing. This is an important constitutional proceeding. I will ask all present to govern themselves accordingly. Pursuant to the sense of the Senate, I now recognize the Senate presenters for up to 1.5 hours. Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms, what purpose do you rise?
Be recognized to present.
You're recognized. Start at 12:12. Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms.
Members of the Senate, I really don't want to be here today. I know you don't want to be here either. My life would have been a whole lot easier if I'd just looked the other way. If the subcommittee had just looked the other way. If the Senate had just looked the other way. But that's not what happened. This is not a trial. I'm not a lawyer. You are not a juror. You are senators at a constitutional Section 3 removal hearing. The plain language of Section 3 reads, "For any willful neglect of duty or other reasonable cause which shall not be sufficient ground for impeachment, the governor shall remove any executive or judicial officer on the address of 2/3 of each house of the General Assembly. There will be no verdict of guilty. There will be no verdict of not guilty. There will not be an acquittal. But the ayes and nays will be taken based on your opinions on whether or not Treasurer Curtis Loftis is responsible for any willful neglect or other reasonable cause." This is the standard that each of us must base our opinions on today. Any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. Willful is defined by Webster's as intentional or deliberate. Neglect means to leave undone, unattended to, especially through carelessness. Another definition simply reads to disregard. And the meaning of other reasonable cause? A sufficient reason. Having a good reason. Any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. Easily understood. It's not complicated. That is our standard. That is our Section 3 constitutional standard that we base our opinions on today. Now, some may try to tell you that it should be a more legal and complex standard. They would be wrong. Again, this is not a trial. I'm not a lawyer. You're not a juror. I am, however, chairman of the Constitutional Subcommittee, and we conduct annual budget reviews and invite the financial executives to testify about their agencies and make budget requests. In January of 2023, at one of these hearings, Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom lit the fuse when he tried to explain away a $3.5 billion restatement that he had posted in the 2022 ACFR. The ACFR is our state's annual comprehensive financial report. The easy thing that day would have been to simply agree with him that a multi-billion-dollar error is fine, it's okay, we're just the government. It's no biggie. But what is the point of conducting a hearing if we simply ignore misfeasance and wrongdoing when it's uncovered? Why look for waste, fraud, and abuse if we never do anything about it, never hold anyone accountable for their failures? But we did our duty because we asked the hard questions and fervently sought to discover the truth. We did those hard things. We did the right things, and we're here today, and there is still just one more hard thing left to do. The subcommittee conducted 11 public hearings representing 27 and a half hours of recorded testimony. Among others, we heard from the treasurer, the comptroller, the interim comptroller, the state auditor, the interim auditor, the auditing firm Clifton Larson Allen, the accounting consulting firm of Malden and Jenkins, and the internationally known forensic accounting group ALEC Partners. Senate staff has worked hundreds of long hours, including holidays and weekends, and we've received, sorted, and researched thousands upon thousands of pages of documents. The subcommittee has now published 3 highly researched and fully documented reports revealing the causes and recommended remedies to the multi-billion-dollar problems we find in our accounting reporting and in our treasury books. We identified 3 financial executives most responsible for the multi-billion-dollar mistakes: Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom and State Auditor George Kennedy have both taken responsibility for their parts and did the honorable thing by resigning their positions. Treasurer Loftis, however, remains defiant and refuses to take responsibility for his failures. When I was first elected years ago, there was a group of freshman legislators from across the country that went to Washington, D.C. And while we were there, we heard a comic. And the guy had us all rolling in the first few minutes with a few jokes. And one of those jokes was, remember in politics, remember now, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It's how you place the blame. And everybody laughed and got a good kick out of that. And then it got quiet for a moment. And then he told us to beware and never forget that there are those who will say anything and do anything to project their failures onto someone else, to project their failures onto you. Don't let them get away with it. And that has stuck with me ever since. Treasurer Loftis has had a big secret he didn't want anybody to know about. And I'll bet the farm that over the past 8 years, he's had a lot of restless nights worrying that secret would get out, that secret would one day be exposed. Such exposure would certainly destroy his self-image and peel back that paper-thin veneer of competence and righteousness he so proudly cloaks himself in. You see, Curtis Loftis had taken an oath to discharge the duties of office of State Treasurer, and the main duty, the primary duty, the main reason we have a State Treasurer is to maintain accurate and complete records of the Treasury. But doing so requires proper reconciliations of cash and investments that he has not done or cannot do. In 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, the state auditor cited the State Treasurer's Office for significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, all related to incomplete or improper reconciliations of cash and investments. And in one report, the state auditor writes, it is probable that the magnitude of the difference in future years will have a material effect on the state's financial systems, on the state's financial statements. The outside independent firms of Malden and Jenkins and ALEC Partners also report that the Treasurer's Office does not perform proper reconciliations. It is an undisputable fact that today the Treasury books are not accurate, they are not complete. And the big secret of Treasurer Loftis, the one that he's kept hidden away, is that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in errors in the Treasury books today, and he doesn't know how to fix them. The existence of these errors is also confirmed by ALEC Partners. It is a fact that his errors have ballooned into multi-billion-dollar problems that are so great that they impair his ability to recognize what money is real and what money is not real. Under oath, he testified that a fund containing a balance of $1.8 billion was real money. So real, in fact, that he had earned $225 million in interest on that money. A year later, because of AlixPartners' forensic audit, we now know that that money was not real and that Treasurer Loftis could not have earned $225 million on money that does not exist. All this in direct contradiction to the under oath sworn testimony of Treasurer Loftis. There's lots of banks that the money flows in and out, real money. But in order to try to make the books balance, you have to add in fake money, money that does not exist. You take real money, you add and subtract fake money, and all of a sudden you get a balance. I'm going to tell you, there are real serious issues anytime anyone has to add funny money to real money to balance their checkbook. If the treasurer does not know if money is real, he doesn't need to be treasurer. Because of his failures, the self-proclaimed best friend of the taxpayer is costing the taxpayers tens of millions in legal, auditing, and oversight fees. And these costs to the taxpayer are just beginning. With friends like this, who needs tax and spend liberals? For Treasurer Loftis, concealing his secret, protecting his public image was much more important than faithfully executing the duties of office of State Treasurer. The Curtis Loftis you see here today is not the Curtis Loftis we elected back in 2022. Back then, he appeared competent and trustworthy. Now that he's been outed, now that his secret's exposed, now that sunlight is shining upon him and his failures, he is a different person. This Curtis Loftis is high risk and unstable. This Curtis Loftis threatened and attempted to expose the bank account architecture of the Treasury in a manner that would have invited cyber thieves to empty the Treasury. This Curtis Loftis has engaged in a campaign of misdirection, blame shifting, and deception. This Curtis Loftis will say anything and do anything to keep others from looking at him and his failures. This Curtis Loftis is a liability to the finances of our state. This Curtis Loftis has broken the public trust, violated his oath of office, has willfully neglected the duties of his office. At this time, I'll yield the floor to the senator from Georgetown.
Senator from Georgetown, Senator Goldfinch is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I commence my remarks, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent for the screens to be lowered so we can see evidence.
Without objection. That was part of, that's already been covered.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking a lot lately, as you can imagine. I am going to be eating a cough drop as we're going through this argument. I hope you will forgive me if I'm smacking and eating this cough drop. I'll try not to be rude with it. Otherwise, I'm afraid my voice may go out. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, today we face a historic moment in South Carolina. As the chairman of the subcommittee said, it's a very regrettable but historic moment. No one at this table, on our subcommittee, or in this chamber relishes the idea of today. We all face this day with sadness and frustration that we even have to be here. But I have seen this body face incredible challenges and rise to the occasion. Just when I begin to doubt, The Senate comes together as one body, united in purpose for the betterment of South Carolina, and we solve the problem. That's what we do. That's what you do. And today, although it is historic, it's no different. Your constitutional duty, your duty here today is oversight, and I have faith that you will do your duty. The senator from Berkeley read to you the constitutional provision, so I won't read it to you again, but I will tell you that this provision was last used in 1875, and the journal from that session is instructive as to what we are considering today. I'd like to read you that, if I could, from Senator Swales, whose portrait sits right there in this chamber. The intention of the Constitution appears to your committee to be beyond doubt. When an executive officer has been guilty of grave crimes and misdemeanors, the Constitution, on one hand, arms the legislature with a powerful weapon of impeachment. But the framers of the Constitution have provided that where 2/3 of both houses of the General Assembly find in official character of such an officer sufficient evidence of his incompetency or his unfitness for the discharge of his duties, it shall be their duty so to declare and to require his removal. Now, in briefer and simpler terms, the Constitution has given 2/3 of both houses of the General Assembly the right to remove an executive officer by vote of want of confidence. Now, interestingly, that proceeding also involved a state treasurer back in 1875, but the question was summed up as this: the only issue made by the address is whether, in the opinion of 2/3 of the General Assembly, with the information before them, it is safe and proper to trust the administration of the state treasury in the hands of such an officer as the state treasurer has proved himself to be. This defines the core question the General Assembly must answer: whether the officer's performance justifies continued trust in their role based on available evidence. It focuses on the practical implications for the state rather than legal culpability, encapsulating the purpose of removal by address as a safeguard for public welfare. Ladies and gentlemen, today you see the fulfillment and the manifestation of our constitutional provision, this constitutional provision. You will hear evidence which details the many examples of willful neglect of duty or other reasonable cause. You will hear the treasurer either knew or should have known about the $1.8 billion error as far back as 2017. You will hear the treasurer's own words that the $1.8 billion actually existed, that he could get it in cash, that he had done a yeoman's work in earning, I've heard 170, I've heard 190, I've heard 225, and I've heard $250 million in interest over the course of the last year. You'll hear the treasurer's own words that the General Assembly spent that interest. And then you'll hear the treasurer's own words that he never said any of that. You'll hear threats from the treasurer's own mouth that he intended on releasing some of our state's most private and sensitive data online, on the internet. You'll hear from our former colleague who's here with us today. Thank you for being here, Senator. Senator McElveen say, I'm not giving you those instructions. And you'll see the letter from the treasurer where he told the Senate that the data was going to be released at noon that day on April 4th, 2024. Now, some of you may have sat on a jury before, or maybe you just watched a lot of Law and Order, and you may be asking yourself, what's the standard here? What's the burden of proof? Should I be judging this evidence based on reasonable cause, on reasonable doubt? which is a very tough standard for the prosecution, or maybe it should be by clear and convincing evidence or a preponderance of the evidence, which is more like getting to the 51-yard line than the 90-yard line. But all of those are wrong because this is not a criminal case. There is no jail time here. And this is not a civil case either. If the treasurer is found responsible under the law here today, he doesn't owe the taxpayers anything, regardless of what he's cost us. And let's not fool ourselves, that's been a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, and will continue to be millions and millions of dollars in legal fees and oversight fees and auditing fees. The standard by which I suggest you hold the treasurer accountable is if he committed any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. And I'll suggest you weigh this evidence based on your experience. In your experience as a senator, in your experience as a businessman or businesswoman, in your experience just as a human being, does this make sense to you? Who do you believe? What does your gut tell you? I believe that you will conclude, after hearing all the evidence, that your gut will tell you our treasurer, that man sitting right there, is a liar. He's a liar that was so concerned with his public appearance that he would do and say anything to cover up this mistake. And ladies and gentlemen, as you know, it's not the mistake that gets you in trouble. It's the cover-up. It's the lies, the irrational and hasty decisions and statements that cause a loss of trust. It's the ego and the pride of the treasurer that ultimately landed us here today. And as you know, pride comes before the fall. And very soon you'll hear evidence from some very talented lawyers sitting right there. They're going to tell you that the treasurer didn't know anything about this probably until 2023. They'll tell you that this was the comptroller general's fault. They may even blame this on the treasurer's staff. But don't confuse their very clever arguments with the treasurer's defense. The treasurer's defense was very clearly articulated in the Post and Courier on April 8th. He said that this was nothing more than a shameless power grab to control the taxpayers' money, dressed up as concern for the public. He called you, a bunch of partisan hacks, and said this process was a farce. He called you, self-serving politicians who want to squander the people's money on insider deals and political ambitions. His defense isn't substantive, ladies and gentlemen. It's to attack you. His defense is to attack you. It's to claim martyrdom. Don't let him get away with that. He needs to be held responsible for his actions. You need to hold him responsible for your constituents, for the future of state government, and for posterity. Now, here at the outset of this hearing, I want to briefly review with you the statutes that we are going to be citing throughout our presentation. The statutes that outline the treasurer's duties are uncomplicated. They're clear, they're relatively easy to understand. These statutes are largely about keeping accurate records and reporting to others the status of the state's treasury. Thank you very much. They're written in plain, simple English, but yet they have not been followed by the treasurer. The neglect of these duties form the grounds on which I believe the General Assembly is compelled by the Constitution to remove the treasurer from office. If we could put up Exhibit 1A, please. I think we've provided the body with an exhibit packet to follow along, so if you're looking at that, it's Exhibit 1A. I'm not gonna read you verbatim the statutes because that'll take a little while, so I'm just gonna quickly summarize them if you'll allow me to do that. 11.5.100, He must create a separate account in his records for each appropriation to ensure that we can see the money allocated and how it's used clearly and accurately. 11.5.120, he must publish quarterly reports accessible to the public, showing the amount of money available and when it's deposited and which fund it belongs to. He must submit a detailed monthly report to the Comptroller General on cash transactions in the Treasury with every amount, every payee, every source, and every use, and provide the CG with accurate cash balance statements and certified information about the state revenue and finances whenever the CG requests it. 11.5.220, after selling general obligation bonds or anticipation notes, he must immediately report to JBRC, HWM, and SFC on the total amount sold, the interest rate, the repayment timeline, and the schedule for paying off the principal. And 11.5.185, which you will hear me reference a lot, he must submit an annual report to the General Assembly covering these things: total state revenue, amount of that revenue placed in the general fund, where the general fund money is held at the end of the last fiscal year, interest earned and how it was used, money spent on debt payments, current status of the general fund reserve, including any spending or repayments. And this is 11.5.185, section 7, subsection 7. This you'll be hearing me reference a lot. Other relevant revenue details, like special state funds or highway funds that the treasurer finds important. The General Assembly will cover the cost of preparing this report in the annual budget. As you look through these code sections, please notice the frequency of the word report. This previews a recurring theme in our hearing. The treasurer is charged to be transparent with the public and the General Assembly. The treasurer has not been transparent with the public or the General Assembly. We're going to present evidence about how he was willfully neglected, how he has willfully neglected the duties described in these statutes, warranting removal under Section 3 of the Article 15, Section 3 of the South Carolina Constitution. Now, of equal significance, perhaps even greater significance than those statutory duties, is what you'll find to be the implicit duty of the treasurer, which is a fiduciary duty, a fiduciary of the state's funds. That requires that he take care of the taxpayer money, that he doesn't risk its loss, that he doesn't cause unnecessary or excess costs to the people of the state of South Carolina. This is so fundamental to the office. We're going to discuss this duty several times with you today, and we believe you'll find that this breach constitutes other reasonable cause for removing the treasurer from office. Now, as we move through these materials, please keep in mind the core question at hand, and this is the core question at hand: whether the treasurer's performance in office justifies your continued trust and confidence in his role based on the information you're presented here today. Now, we may have many long-term, truly years-long issues in the treasurer's office to discuss with you today, but we're going to start with a more current event, which I believe will quickly introduce you to the risk posed if this state treasurer stays in office. Our state, like many states, receives significant funding from the federal government. To blunt the effects of the COVID pandemic, we received significant funding from the federal government. And one of those pots of money was the Housing Relief Fund, which you may recall was financial assistance for homeowners for mortgage payments, homeowners insurance, utility costs, among other housing-related expenses. The goal was to prevent mortgage delinquencies, defaults, foreclosures, and other housing-related issues. There was an error in setting up this fund. Excuse me. The funds should have been established to retain its own interest, as likely should be the case with all federal funds, unless specifically exempted by federal statute or regulation. The funds are always subject to either the provisions of the Cash Management Improvement Act, the administration of which is the responsibility of the State Treasurer's Office, or other federal regulations. We have a copy of this federal regulation, which if you could please put up on the screen, which is, I think, Exhibit 2A. This should also be in your exhibit packet. Thank you. Interest earned amounts up to $500 per year may be retained by the non-federal entity. Any additional interest earned, federal advance payments deposited in interest-bearing accounts must be remitted annually to the Department of Health and Human Services Payment Management System. Now, as we contemplate the federal provision, let's keep in mind the treasurer also had a statute. He's governed by a state statute mandating that he provide pertinent or valuable information to the General Assembly. You may remember me telling you that statute. So let's please put that back up. Exhibit 2B. You can see the highlighted portion there. Failing to keep us abreast of important financial matters is another recurring theme, and you'll be hearing us talk about that quite a bit. The highlighted portion you see there says, any other information relating to state revenue which the treasurer deems pertinent and of value to the General Assembly. Now, despite his duty under the statute, we heard nothing from the treasurer about this issue. Nothing. On March 18th, 2025, the U.S. Treasury issued a notice of non-compliance to the state housing because the treasurer refused to repay interest earned on the Housing Assistance Fund, as was a requirement of accepting those funds and almost all federal funds. Here's the notice of non-compliance, Exhibit 2C. If you could please put that up. And please be sure to note that one of the penalties proposed in this exhibit is repayment of all the funds awarded, which is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. As it turns out, we were put into non-compliance last month because we'd owed that rebate of the interest earned for over 6 months, ladies and gentlemen. 6 months. Why was that interest not rebated? Because the treasurer refused to move the funds to housing so they could remit them. State housing was so concerned about the risk associated with being in noncompliance that they reached out to legislative leaders, gubernatorial staffers, legislative staffers in September of last year, asking if they could convince the treasurer to move the money for repayment. And here's the letter they wrote to Quentin Hawkins, Meredith Ross, and Trey Walker, which none of them, by the way, have any authority over the treasurer or the funds. If you could please put up Exhibit 2D. And for further reference, this topic is discussed in our report on page 47 of the exhibit packet, beginning on page 603. Now, this is a 2-page letter, so if you got it on the second page. Thank you very much. Even though this return of earned interest is something that is regularly done by the treasurer, this time he refused to do so. Over the course of budget deliberations, the chairman of Natural Resources Subcommittee, the senator from Beaufort, learned about the bind that our housing agency was in due to the refusal of the treasurer and tried to help set things right. Ultimately, it took the issuance of an attorney general's opinion to force the treasurer to do his job. Let's put up that letter. That's Exhibit 2E, please. Please notice the date of this letter, March 31st, 2025. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion there at the conclusion. Thank you. According to Senator Davis and Senator Beaufort's letter, this is a matter of extreme urgency. If the funds in question are not returned immediately, which is the ministerial duty to do, the state will be disgorged of millions upon millions of dollars at a tremendous cost to the taxpayers. Thus, based upon the ministerial duty to pay the monies in question, we strongly recommend you do. It is our hope that we are now back in compliance. But we are not yet certain of that, ladies and gentlemen. We know that the funds were placed in the incorrect account during the work from home days of COVID. We know that. But that was not the barrier to legal compliance the treasurer claimed it to be. He was charged with reporting to us matters of interest. But we heard about his noncompliance with federal law, not from him, not from his staff, but from housing. He has a fiduciary duty to custody funds with care, but it took an attorney general opinion that essentially said, do your job, Mr. Treasurer, before he would do it. He risked the state's loss of hundreds of millions of dollars, likely just to prove a point because of the investigation of this body. He apparently didn't consider the millions upon millions of dollars that he almost cost us, so he never reported it. And this instance is just one more example of why the state cannot afford to have that man continue on as your treasurer. It's remarkable also that the process of remitting funds back to the U.S. Treasury did not even begin until after the Attorney General's letter was sent, but also after the adoption of the sense of the Senate setting the date for today for the removal of the treasurer. The fundamental duty of the treasurer is to keep accurate books. And the AlixPartners report left no doubt that his failure to do so is at the root of the $1.8 billion problem. The treasurer consistently asserts that his financial records are flawless. In fact, I've heard him say multiple times, my books are perfect, and that no issues exist in the Treasury. The treasurer even claimed, falsely, but claimed that AlixPartners validated his records were perfect and that they were kept. But the firm refuted this in writing and in person, making a second special trip to the state to clarify what their report actually said. You'll see in this video that the experts speak specifically to the degree of detail and accounting that the treasurer had the treasurer not neglected his duty, as we all know, would have revealed the errors had he done it correctly. Please pull up Exhibit 3A. The complete transcript of this video is in the final report, page 372, if you'd like to follow along.
As we sit here today, what would be, and this is a question for each of you, one misstatement that gives you the greatest concern as it analyzes your report?
I don't know that I would have a ranking of concerns necessarily, but one thing that stands out in my mind is I believe there's a statement of passing with flying colors or something to that effect. As we sort of just went through in your last questioning in terms of how things that were accounted for from our perspective, we think they should have been accounted for differently and investigated at the time.
Passing it, so by that you mean it's a misstatement to say that the accounting was in the treasurer's office passed with flying colors.
Yes, within his responsibility and the responsibility of the state treasurer's office and the comptroller general's office.
Thank you, Ms.
Yeah, what I would say is in the context of when he was discussing the number of recommendations that we had made, that there were approximately 25 that relate to the CGO's office, and yet there was only one made to his office. I think if you look down into that, the one that we make with his office is that he didn't reconcile the account by funds. And had he taken that step to reconcile by funds as well, then account number 30350993 would have been apparent there, as well as the Act for Business Areas. So by not doing it by fund, that was a missed opportunity to find this, so you can't really go quantity by quality.
Having these mistakes on the books as the state treasurer is a plain violation of the law. And there are two different sections of code that speak directly to this. Let's put up sections 11.5.100 and 11.5.120 again, please. I think that's Exhibit 3B. Thank you. The existence of a $1.8 billion balance with no designated ownership violates this statute, as a lack of ownership is neither clear nor distinct. Section 11.5.120 speaks to the degree of particularity required in the treasurer's reporting. The treasurer simply cannot show the respective funds to which money on hand belongs. He may have reports posted online to point to, but so long as the $1.8 billion exists, those reports are not correct. Now, in February of 2024, a media interview conducted about a month after the subcommittee wrote to the treasurer inquiring about the $1.8 billion error. The treasurer confidently told the interviewer that all was well, good with his accounts, and with all of the money. Let's pull up Exhibit 3C if we could, please. Full copy of that transcript from the media interview is also in your packet on page 29. As you can see here on the highlighted portion, I'll just direct your attention to that. Treasurer Loftis. Well, it was invested. We've made $194 million off that money. It wasn't forgotten in the treasurer's office. It was in the right account, at the right place, at the right time, and it's been there for years. Of perhaps greater concern than the inaccuracies in the books and the words of the treasurer associated statutory breaches is contemplating how the next steps of correction can take place with that treasurer sitting right there in office. The treasurer demonstrated a lack of engagement with the experts from Alex Partners as they met to discuss recommendations for cleaning up the state's books. Please turn your attention to Exhibit 3D, a portion of the video from our second meeting with Alex Partners.
How many times did you or anyone on your team talk with the treasurer directly?
So he attended 3 of those meetings. I don't have a specific recollection of him having much of a speaking role in any of those meetings, but he did attend.
So how many times did you talk to the treasurer?
In terms of a one-way conversation, all 3 of those times. How much times he responded, I guess, is where we're not exactly clear.
How much information did you get directly from the treasurer?
That he would have provided verbally to us?
Yes, on what he did to unravel this problem, or what he did to find this problem, or what he did to question his staff about why we have this problem. How many times did you, in your investigative role, deal directly with him?
So the 3 times, but as I said, I don't believe he had much of a speaking role in those 3 meetings.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be able to count on our treasurer to have accurate books. That is just fundamental to the office of the treasurer. Not only did the treasurer fail to keep accurate books, he did not even consider an unaccounted for $1.8 billion error on his part. I suspect you might hear the treasurer or his counsel argue that all we have to do is reverse the entries, like a forced reconciliation, if you will. Now, that may be good enough for your elementary school PTO, but that is not the standard for our state's treasury. Treasurer Loftis was unable to recognize a significant error in his records, and he doesn't know how to correct that error. Our state deserves better than this. We deserve a treasurer who can follow state statutes and keep accurate accounting books. Treasurer Loftis also failed to identify and report a critical and substantial error in his financial records, an error that had a profound implication for the state's reported cash balances. From the outset of the investigation and continuing through the release of the AlixPartners report, Treasurer Loftis reportedly and unequivocally asserted that the $1.8 billion fund balance in 993 represented real cash. He maintained that these funds were pooled, that they were invested, and that they had generated, you've heard it, $170, $190, $225, $250 million. We've heard lots of different numbers from the treasurer. That position was not just casually held. It was forcefully reaffirmed during sworn testimony on April 2nd, 2024, before myself and the subcommittee, where Treasurer Loftis insisted that 993 contained actual liquid assets. At no point during that time, not once, did he indicate any uncertainty or doubt regarding the nature of those funds. Only after the release of the AlixPartners report, an independent forensic review exposing the truth, which cost us millions of dollars, by the way, did Treasurer Loftis abruptly reverse course, claiming that he had always known that these funds were not real. This sudden shift in narrative not only contradicts his prior statements, but also calls into question any credibility of his representations throughout our investigation. Now, let's please take a look at the compilation of instances where he asserted the money was real in April of 2024 compared to his Facebook video on January 2025. That's Exhibit 4A, please.
The 1.8 billion, could we withdraw it today?
Yeah.
Is it real?
I'll get it cash for you.
Is it real money that I could touch?
Yes.
Could we transfer it to another bank?
Well, it gets transferred every day to another. That money exists whether I know who owns it or doesn't own it. It exists. I've got to deal with
two or
that.
three interviews you've given, and in those 2 or 3 interviews, you have clearly said in one interview, 170 to $190 million in interest was made on this $1.8 billion. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
The last interview I heard, you said $250 million had been made in interest on that account. Isn't that true?
That's right, because we ran the papers.
Okay, which is correct, 170 or 250?
Give me a second, I got it right here. We ran the information. The first one I got an estimate, the second one we refined it, and then I said send it off to another bank and make sure and double check it. So it's $225 million. Oh, here it is right here.
But you've also, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've also stated that some of the interest generated has been spent by the General Assembly.
Yes.
Off the 1.8. Mm-hmm. But I think you agree with the senator from Georgetown earlier that if indeed some of that money is owed to some particular agencies or entities, they'd be owed the interest as well, correct?
That's not a problem.
That's not a problem?
I'm Curtis Loftis, your State Treasurer, and I wanted to share an important message with you regarding the final report by AlixPartners and its results. Let me be very, very clear. This report confirms that there is no mystery bank account with $1.8 billion in it. There is no missing money, and all cash and investments are accounted for. I want to reassure you, the citizens of South Carolina, that you can be confident that the state's money is safe. We thank AlixPartners for their efforts, which have validated what we've known all along. We, along with our state partners, look forward to reviewing the report in its entirety and helping institute the changes to the system as necessary. Thank you.
They validated what he knew all along. All along. Yo, that's a lie. That man is a liar. The treasurer's shifting explanations have only deepened the confusion. For months, he steadfastly maintained that the $1.8 billion in question was real money. It was real money. You could put it in your hand. It was invested, generating returns. You heard the various numbers. Until it wasn't. Until AlixPartners issued its report and definitively concluded those funds never existed. It was a lie. Now, when he appeared before the subcommittee as recently as February, I confronted him with his prior statements. And rather than acknowledge the inconsistency, he attempted to reframe the question, claiming that the confusion arose from a misunderstanding that we had, a misunderstanding about terminology. According to him, the subcommittee misinterpreted his words, conflating fund with account. This revisionist explanation, offered only after the truth had been independently confirmed and verified by AlixPartners, it not only lacks credibility, but also reflects an ongoing effort to obscure the facts and evade accountability. Let's take a look at what he told me in 2024 versus his explanation in 2025. Please pull up Exhibit 4B. If you'll know, all of our subcommittee meeting videos are available in full. I know y'all know this, but they're available online if you'd like to watch the full video, if you should have any questions about context.
False. Senator, that money exists whether I know who owns it or doesn't own it. It exists. I've got to deal with that.
I believe it was real money.
I did believe. Well, it represents real money. It's a fund that represents real money that shows up in the bank's accounts.
And isn't it true that...
Isn't it true that you testified that there was money in that fund?
It represented money. It represents cash.
You said cash. It's a lie. Regardless of whether the $1.8 billion was ever real or not, the fact remains that this extraordinary anomaly sat in Fund 993 for years and years, unexplained, uncorrected, and remember this part, unreported. Under a section 11.5.185 of the South Carolina Code, the treasurer has a clear statutory obligation to report to you, to the General Assembly, any financial information he deems pertinent and of value. The standard is not vague. It provides him with both the discretion and the duty to flag significant irregularities that could impact the state's financial standing. The prolonged presence of a $1.8 billion discrepancy in a state fund unquestionably meets that threshold. And yet, there is no evidence that the treasurer made any effort to notify the General Assembly or to clarify the nature of this anomaly. Now, before we go further, let's take a closer look at the language of that statute once again, please. Please pull up Exhibit 4C. Just want to make sure that I'm hitting that statute well. And I want to make sure that you see the highlighted portion there. Any other information relating to state revenue which the treasurer deems pertinent and of value to the General Assembly. Now let us consider who did bring this issue to light. Following the subcommittee's investigation into the $3.5 billion restatement and the resignation of Comptroller General Ekstrom, Governor McMaster appointed Comptroller General Gaines in May of 2023. Upon assuming office, General Gaines quickly identified the $1.8 billion and in October 2023, formally inquired about it in a letter to Treasurer Loftis. That's page 4 of your exhibit packet in the final report. Treasurer Loftis did not answer any of the questions that were posed. Instead, he deflected, asking General Gaines to provide him with information instead. That's page 6 of your exhibit packet on the final report. In response, General Gaines clearly asked in a letter, which I'm going to show you now, that Loftis investigate and report the matter to the General Assembly. He told him to report it, given the magnitude of the funds, and that there was no ability to identify the classification. Please pull up Exhibit 4D. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion. The state's treasurer's office is the only state entity that may move the amounts in Fund 993 to the appropriate SKIS fund and make its purpose known to the General Assembly. Now, rather than doing the easy thing, the right thing, the correct thing, fulfilling his obligation to notify the General Assembly, the treasurer chose instead to question General Gaines about the distribution of his letter, who he sent it to. This response was not a good faith effort to address the issue. It was a clear attempt, another clear attempt to deflect and further obscure the matter. And at a moment where transparency was necessary and expected, all the treasurer needed to do to discharge his duty was to tell us, tell you. But he chose obfuscation over accountability once again. Please pull up Exhibit 4E. And as a reminder, you have copies of these exhibits in your packet too. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion of this letter down at the bottom. This is from Treasurer Loftis to General Gaines. Instead of digging into the issue, his response was, I request that you notify me in writing of the names of the individuals with whom you shared this letter. Concerned not about the state's finances, not about the state's accounting, but about his status. As we consider the back and forth between Comptroller General and Treasurer Loftis, we should also remind you the working relationship between the Treasurer and the Comptroller General. That's addressed in statute directly. These two financial officers of the state must be able to rely upon one another for accurate information. And further, there's a statute that specifically says the Treasurer must provide satisfactory statements at all times to the Comptroller General when he requests it. Let's take a look at Exhibit 4F, please. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion. He shall at all times, when required by the Comptroller General, produce to him satisfactory statements of the cash in hand and furnish him promptly with the official information duly certified relative to any matter connected with the revenue and finance of the state. In the end, Treasurer Loftis didn't act as a steward of the public's trust. When he was faced with a $1.8 billion anomaly that remained in state records for years and years and years, he failed to detect it, he failed to report it, and when questioned, he failed to tell the truth about it. He stood by false representations until those claims were publicly and independently refuted. Then he attempted to revise history rather than accept responsibility. At every critical juncture, when he could have acknowledged the error, he could have notified the General Assembly, could have clarified the facts. He instead chose evasion and deflection and delay. This was not momentary oversight or a technical misunderstanding by any means. It was a sustained failure of judgment, of duty, and of candor. The law requires transparency, as you've seen. The people demand accountability, and Treasurer Loftis delivered neither. You may hear the treasurer, he may contend that he was unaware of the $1.8 billion in errors stemming from the conversion. However, he had a clear duty to know. And the findings of AlixPartners affirmed that he should have been aware, that he had a clear duty to know. He should have been aware of these errors in the course of fulfilling his responsibilities. If we could, please, let's take another look at another clip from March 11th, 2025. I think that's Exhibit 5A.
But you don't believe the treasurer knew about it?
Haven't seen any documents that would indicate that.
Should he have known about it?
The conversion process was really owned by the treasurer's office, and so that was he had oversight over the treasurer's office.
Okay, thank you. Senator.
The treasurer may attempt to deflect responsibility by claiming the error was solely attributable to the CG, and therefore it wasn't his obligation to report. He's even gone as far as to produce a misleading document purporting to support this assertion. However, this argument does not withstand scrutiny. In fact, but for 2 entries made by the CG's office, by an employee in the CG's office in February 2023, 2 entries, which were an effort to resolve the longstanding issue, over 22,000 entries into Fund 993 were made by the Treasurer's office. I want to say that again, y'all. 2 entries by the CG's office, which were made to try to correct the issue. 22,000 entries made by the Treasurer's office, creating the problem. This context makes clear that the treasurer cannot absolve himself of responsibility simply by pointing the finger at somebody else. We have a table that shows the analysis of those entries. I'd like to direct your attention to the entries made between 2015 and 2018. That's the time in which the $1.8 billion was accumulated. That's Exhibit 5B. Now, that's small. I realize you may not be able to read it, but it's a highlighted portion showing STO making approximately 22,000 entries. But please don't take our analysis for it. I respectfully direct your attention to the testimony provided by AlixPartners. In their review, AlixPartners expressly concluded that the employees within the Office of State Treasurer and the individuals operating directly under the Treasurer's control and authority were responsible for making the entries in question. Their findings directly contradict any suggestion that the Treasurer's office played no role and further affirm that accountability rests with the Treasurer. Please pull up Exhibit 5C.
The 3035093 is a treasury fund. It's associated with the business area E160 in Skis, which corresponds to the state treasurer's office, and it's only associated with the state treasurer's office.
So it is a treasury fund?
Yes, it is.
And the entries that are made to it are made by Comptroller General staff?
No, the overwhelming majority were made by the state treasurer's office.
State Treasurer's office.
Treasurer Loftis' attempt to disclaim responsibility for the $1.8 billion error, thank you very much, is both factually and legally indefensible. He had an affirmative duty to know and to report significant anomalies within the state's financial records. AlixPartners, through an independent and detailed forensic accounting review, which cost us millions of dollars, by the way, confirmed this with personnel within the Treasurer's office or acting under its discretion were directly responsible for the overwhelming majority of the erroneous entries. Again, 2 at the CG's office, which were correcting entries, 22,000 at the Treasurer's office. Y'all, the evidence here is clear. This failure occurred on that man's watch, under his authority, and within his responsibility. On April 2nd, 2024, when he was questioned about his compliance with Section 11.5.120 of the South Carolina Code, which requires quarterly public disclosure of cash balances, fund ownership, the treasurer responded with visible anger. He was angry. He accused the subcommittee members of directing him to release sensitive financial data, including bank account numbers and banks, arguing that such disclosures could create cybersecurity risk and invite foreign attacks. Those were his words. He told us that the disclosure could cause major problems for the state's finances. Our former colleague, Senator McElveen, who's sitting in the back of the room, promptly clarified, as you will see in this recording, that no such request had been made and they were not seeking the publication of detailed or sensitive account data. If we could please pull up Exhibit 6A.
But the modern interpretation, as this Senate hearing has, is for us to post the architecture of the state's bank online, and we will do so today. I've been given clear instructions. We're more than happy to do it.
Well, I'm not giving instructions. My question is really just how do you interpret your statutory responsibility?
Yeah.
Are you in compliance with the statute?
Despite those clarifications and despite warnings of the dangers himself, the treasurer sent a letter to the subcommittee on April 4th indicating that he was taking steps to post the information, prompting the subcommittee and this Senate to take action. You may hear the treasurer and his counsel assert that there was never any intent to publish this information. However, I direct your attention to the highlighted language in his letter, which states unequivocally, with respect to the electronic publication for review of quarterly statements, we will begin posting. This phrasing reflects a clear and affirmative intent to disclose the information in question. Please put up Exhibit 6B. I'm going to draw your attention to what I just read, the highlighted portion at the bottom. With respect to the electronic publication for public review of quarterly statements referenced in 11.5.120, we will begin posting on the state's treasurer's website a detailed fund report. Then he goes on to tell us, we alerted the Department of Administration so the agency can take actions to protect the state's other information and financial systems from the added security risk. He knows he's causing a problem. That's a threat. The letter you just reviewed became a central point of contention during the subcommittee's February 2025 hearing. Treasurer Loftis claimed that the letter was fabricated, that we made it up. It was fabricated by our staff. He went as far as to accuse the subcommittee of suppressing the actual letter. That this letter was a fake letter that we made up, that members in this body made a fake letter to make him look bad. This actual letter, which you'll see in just a minute, was supposedly sent 2.5 hours after the real letter was sent. Subcommittee staff never received that letter. So to verify, we requested assistance from the Department of Administration to pull internal communication records. And what we discovered was telling. Please pull up Exhibit 6C. I'd like for you, if you're following along in your exhibits, that's kind of hard to see up on the screen, I'd like for you to sort of follow along if you could, please. You'll see phone calls and various emails. On the morning the subcommittee received the treasurer's letter indicating his intent to publish the sensitive financial data, Director Adams had already contacted the treasurer's chief of staff to confirm that the IT team, DOA's IT team, was actively assessing the cybersecurity risks associated with such a release. 3 hours later, the subcommittee received the letter that we previously showed you declaring the treasurer's plan to move forward, despite the ongoing risk evaluations. At 1:37 p.m., Director Adams sent a formal email stating that DOA had engaged an external cybersecurity firm and had strongly recommended no information be posted until the assessment was complete. And then, curiously, at 2:32 p.m., 2 hours later, a second letter arrives, allegedly clarifying the treasurer's position. It was sent from a different employee, by the way. First, only to the senator from Berkeley, and then 4 minutes later to the remaining subcommittee members, notably excluding subcommittee staff. The purported assurance conveyed in the second letter is not clearly or independently stated. Rather, it is embedded within a series of bullet points aimed at correcting aspects of the treasurer's April 24th, 2024 testimony. As such, it fails to provide any explicit or unambiguous guarantee and cannot reasonably construed as a clear assurance to the subcommittee. Now let's please take a look at Exhibit 6D. Second page, please. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion. This is what he purports is the correcting letter. When I stated in the hearing that the State Treasurer's Office is not in compliance with these reporting requirements, what I meant to say, I meant that my office had not yet had the opportunity to change its reporting procedures in accordance with the reinterpretation articulated to me at the hearing. We are now working towards devising a secure means of complying with these new disclosure obligations. And this letter only appeared after the subcommittee took extreme measures to intercept the reckless actions of the treasurer. We immediately called the Department of Administration to see what could be done to stop him. The director, Marcia Adams, was trying to figure out a way to take down his website. We called the governor, who was actually coming out of anesthesia, who was having surgery. It was so important that we get the governor on the line to try to stop that man over there from releasing our state's financial data. We called the chief of SLED, Chief Keel, and asked him to intercept, and he did, and stopped Treasurer Loftis from releasing our state's most private, sensitive financial data online. And when the treasurer appeared in February of 2025, he thought our actions to intercept his threat was funny. He said that he had a good laugh about it. Y'all, nothing about this is funny. Nothing about this is funny. This raises serious questions as to whether the second letter was a genuine clarification or a reactive attempt to mitigate the implications of the treasurer's prior statements. Later that afternoon, Marcia Adams, the director of DOA, who's the internet security hub for our state agencies, as you know, formally communicated the cybersecurity risk in a written letter to the treasurer. These high-level interventions underscore the severity of the threat and the significant risk it posed to the integrity of the state's financial systems. Please pull up that letter from Marcia Adams on, I think it's Exhibit 6E. I'd like to direct your attention to the highlighted portions. First, also, I gave her my initial opinion that the information should not be publicly posted and my strong recommendation that the document should not be released until we have had a chance to outline the risk associated with it. First, it is apparent that the detailed fund report contains more information and more specificity related to the information than may be required to be published by the State Treasurer's Office. The experts warned that providing so many identifying data points would give potential hackers more ability to triangulate and map their way to improper access. The treasurer reveals a dangerous combination of recklessness, misrepresentation, and disregard for his statutory and fiduciary duties. When confronted with a question about a legal requirement, he responded not with cooperation, but with hostility, false allegations, false accusations, alleging that the subcommittee directed him to release sensitive information when he knew no such request was ever made. It was done out of spite. Despite those clarifications and his own warnings about cybersecurity risk, he moved forward with plans to publish that data anyway, prompting urgent intervention from the chief of SLED, the governor, the director of the DOA, the subcommittee, and this chamber right here. These actions alone, if you didn't hear anything else that I said today, these actions alone show the extraordinary risk that his conduct posed and poses still to this day to the financial integrity of this state. When held accountable, the treasurer shifted tactics, accused the subcommittee of fabricating a letter and pointing to a second as evidence. That second letter, as I already told you, was sent 2 hours later, and you've seen the evidence of that. And it was sent under questionable circumstances. It failed to provide any assurance. It was not received by staff, and it was only located with assistance from the Department of Administration. I ask you to think about why. Taken together, these actions reflect a deliberate pattern of evasion, of misdirection, and poor judgment. One that placed South Carolina's financial systems at risk. One that placed your constituents' finances at risk. The tax dollars that they pay at risk. It violated the very duties entrusted to the treasurer, not only by law, but also to those which he swore an oath. So now that you've had a chance to hear the case for removal, you've heard it laid out, you've seen the evidence. The body of evidence collected by the subcommittee is extensive, y'all. It's thousands upon thousands of pages, tens of thousands of pages. And what you've just heard is truly a very brief summation of all of that. We've talked about 4 or 5 statutes and the breaches of those duties as they occurred over the course of years. A major compilation of technical information and many, many significant events. But I hope that in the time ahead, you'll recall the ongoing theme. That we have a statutory requirement for accuracy, for transparency, and a need for our state treasurer to exercise a fiduciary duty within the Treasury. Keep this question in mind as you hear the treasurer's case in just a minute. Does this give me confidence that the treasurer has fulfilled his statutory duties and will continue to do so in the future? Thank you very much.
Members of the body, you've heard the various statutes, the very cords that are supposed to bind the treasurer to do his duty that he has failed in. The finances of our state are vitally important, that we must have accurate records. And if he had just followed just one of those statutes, we wouldn't be here today. we wouldn't be here today. I just checked, and right now, on the books of the Treasury, right now, there is $1,852,455,573.29 of errors that are mixed in with the cash and cash investments that do not exist. But you have to put the fake money in to make the system balance with the real money. Mixing in fake money and real money is not what our treasurer ought to be doing. We should be talking about real dollars. When I was about 8 years old, I was enrolled in the junior Sunday school class of the First Baptist Church in St. Stephen. That's where I first learned about the Ten Commandments. I remember my grandfather's lessons on the 9th commandment found in Exodus. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And those lessons have stuck with me throughout my life. Bearing false witness goes beyond intentional lying. It also includes gossip, malicious slander, misdirection, blame shifting, obfuscation, and deception. Bearing false witness is all about saying and doing things in an attempt to make somebody believe something that is not true. Treasurer Loftis is really good at that. While there are many, many examples of false and misleading communications in the time of interest, I'm just going to hit a few of them. Treasurer Loftis likes to say that the Comptroller General Gaines is responsible for the $1.8 billion in errors in the Treasury books. Never mind the fact that Brian Gaines did not become Comptroller General until 2023, and the origins of the $1.8 billion problem began under the Treasurer's watch in 2012. In sworn testimony before the subcommittee, Treasurer Loftis said, quote, "The Senate is trying to get their fingers on the $54 billion I'm protecting." What the Treasurer knows, but most of the public may not know, is that every tax dollar held in trust by the Treasurer is done so by the authority of an act adopted by the legislature. In other words, every tax dollar entrusted to Treasurer Loftis is put there in his care by actions of the legislature. In a recent Post and Courier opinion piece, Treasurer Loftis writes, "This group of senators sees the state treasury as a gold mine, and they're itching to get their hands on it." He goes on to say that senators are plotting to raid the Treasury for their own benefit. This statement is ridiculous beyond belief. False and inflammatory statements like that erode the confidence in representative democracy and undermine the principles of constitutional authority. And y'all probably had some text messages over the last week or so. I know I have. And through mass text messaging paid for by Loftis for Treasurer, there are some people in this state right now that believe we're here today to remove conservative judges. Does anyone in their right mind think we're here today removing conservative judges? Don't put our conservative judges at risk. Support Curtis Loftis, the messages say. Again, Treasurer Loftis is a false witness sending out deceiving messages to fool the public into believing things that aren't true. The Treasurer of South Carolina should never be making deceptive public statements. Credibility and trust are essential. The Treasurer of South Carolina should be courageous, honest, and honorable. The Treasurer should be someone who leads with integrity instead of hiding behind a campaign of deception, blame shifting, and dishonesty. We're here today under extraordinary circumstances to fulfill our constitutional duty because that man has failed in his duty. Up there on the wall by the exit sign is Senator Swales. Senator Swales held the podium 150 years ago under similar circumstances. In the Journal of March 12th, He writes, the framers of the Constitution have provided that where 2/3 of both houses of the General Assembly find in the official character of such an officer sufficient evidence of his incompetency or his unfitness for the discharge of his duties, and where they believe that the interest and character of the state are endangered by his continuation in office, it shall be their duty to declare and require his removal. After today's hearing, I am confident that you will understand Treasurer Loftis's incompetency and unfitness to discharge the duties, and that it is your duty to require his removal.
I asked that we take a 10-minute break before the treasurer and his team present their position.
It's on now. Let me try.
Please return to the chamber. Our recess is completed. The Committee of the Whole is back in order. Again, I'll ask members to be at their seats. Pursuant to the sense of the Senate, I now recognize Treasurer Loftis and his counsel for up to 3 hours, and the time is 1:49. Soon, 1:50, excuse me, 1:50. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the Senate, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address this distinguished body. Here we are in the Senate chamber, in the most historic hearing in the history of this chamber since its creation in some 250 years. What the presenters are asking you to do today has never been done in the history of the state of South Carolina. In fact, it's never been done in the history of the United States of America in any state senate. No state senate has ever removed a constitutional officer using legislative expulsion or removal proceedings. And the presenters are not just asking you to remove any state official. Treasurer Loftis is the most popular statewide official in the history of South Carolina. This is a man who received 80% of the vote in the last election. A man who received overwhelming bipartisan support. Think for a moment about the drastic and the extraordinary measure the presenters are asking you to take today. And they're asking you to make this decision not based on a trial, not with witnesses, not with exhibits and documents and expert testimony and authentication of documents, not with rules of evidence, but based upon a 1.5-hour presentation with video clips. There is not one shred of proof and absolutely no evidence to support the removal of Treasurer Loftis. We are here because the courage and the resolve of Curtis Loftis was underestimated. This is indeed unprecedented. And because it is unprecedented, people are watching. People are watching from the Senate balcony. South Carolinians are watching on live stream TV, and the rest of the country is watching you. Your names will forever be associated with the outcome of this proceeding. My name is Debbie Barbier, and I, along with Johnny Gasser and Sean Eubanks, are proud and privileged to stand before you today and represent our state treasurer, Curtis Loftis. If this can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. We are here not merely to defend a man and his honor, but to defend the very principles upon which our great state and our nation were founded upon. Principles that transcend politics, transcend personalities, and partisanship. We speak in the defense of a principle that predates this chamber, this state, and even this nation. The principle of due process of law. Embedded in both the United States Constitution and in our state constitution, due process is not a suggestion. It is not discretionary. It is an obligation, a constitutional command that ensures that no citizen, no elected official, no resident of this state is deprived of liberty, property, or reputation without a fair and an impartial process. Due process is not merely about formality, it's about fairness. It guarantees the right to know the accusations, to see the evidence, to confront accusers, to present a defense. These are not luxuries of the courtroom. They are essential components of justice, even within the halls of government. When each of you became a state senator, you took an oath. You raised your right hand, you put your left hand on the Bible, and you swore to preserve and to protect and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States of America. When this legislative body undertakes actions that affect the standing, the reputation, or a career of a constitutional officer or of any citizen, it must do so within the bounds of due process. If we bypass those safeguards, we do more than undermine one person. We undermine the integrity of this institution. What it tells the people of South Carolina is that constitutional rights are conditional and that they can be cast aside when it's inconvenient or politically expedient. That is not the message that you all were elected to send. The people of this state entrust you with power, but that power is not unlimited. It is restrained by law, and it is those restraints that's what separates us from being a government of laws, from being a government of men. We do not get to choose which constitutional rights we respect based on who stands accused. If we abandon due process for one, we endanger the rights for all. Recent history has taught us there are consequences when politicians and prosecutors try to substitute their judgment for those of the voters. President Donald Trump became the target of state and federal prosecutors and political rivals. You will recall that he was indicted 4 times and faced 91 felony counts across state and federal courts. He endured two impeachment trials. 4 states attempted to take him off the ballot. Many people went out of their way to prevent people from being able to vote for him and to prevent him from holding public office. And then, in November of 2024, the voters spoke. What have we learned from the last 10 years? We learned that the power of the people in this country is strong. We learned that voters do not want to be disenfranchised. We learned that people do not want to be told that their vote doesn't matter. We learned that people don't want to be told that you know better than them. So I submit to you, let the voters decide. The primary is 14 months away. Our democracy was built by letting issues like this be decided at the ballot box. Treasurer Loftis is an elected constitutional officer of the state of South Carolina. He was chosen not by appointment, not by backroom consensus, but by the will of the people, by the voters of this state. Voters who entrusted him with the sacred responsibility of guarding their tax dollars, managing the state's finances, and protecting the public trust. Now, after listening to the presentation, many of you might be asking yourself, what did Treasurer Loftis actually personally do wrong? Where is the smoking gun? He stands accused of willfully neglecting his duties as the treasurer. But what specific duties did he willfully neglect? And at the end of this proceeding, I submit to you respectfully that Curtis Loftis did not neglect one single solitary duty as treasurer. You have not seen one document, you have not heard one word of testimony, and you have seen no evidence that Treasurer Loftis willfully neglected his duties as treasurer. There's no money missing. There's no stolen money. There's no scheme to defraud. There's no conspiracy. It's just not there. In fact, you're going to be reminded that during our presentation, that during his tenure and during his leadership, South Carolina has thrived over the last 15 years. The fact of the matter is, if you read the media accounts of this, it's far more interesting than it actually is. It's an accounting error, a series of erroneous journal entries. It was an on-paper accounting error. End of story. And we don't seek to minimize this issue. It's a very serious issue that the Treasurer's Office has taken seriously from the beginning. The Alex report, as you heard, made 25 recommendations. One of those recommendations was directed at the Treasurer's Office. Two of the other ones were directed at multiple agencies along with the Treasurer's Office. I ask you, have you ever seen an audit report that didn't make some recommendations? Because every single federal and/or state agency can always stand some room for improvement. But I want to focus you for a minute on what is not in that report. There is not one single finding in the Alex report that Curtis Loftis willfully neglected his duties as treasurer. In fact, there is no finding in that report that he personally did anything wrong. The bulk of that report is directed at recommendations to the Comptroller General's office because they are responsible for the accounting of the state. Importantly, the Treasurer's Office is responsible for the state's banking. The Comptroller's General Office is responsible for the accounting. And we ask you to look in the folders provided to you. There are affidavits in that folder. 4 of them are from current employees of the State Treasurer's Office, and 1 is from a former employee of the State Treasurer's Office. We respectfully ask you to read those affidavits. If we had been allowed to call witnesses, you would have heard from these people. You could have watched them testify and watched them be cross-examined. But we were not allowed to bring you those witnesses or those facts. I can tell you these are good people who work for the state of South Carolina in the Treasury's Office. They are talented. They go to work every day, and they give their expertise in good faith to the citizens of this state. They could be in the private sector. Instead, They work for our state. And Treasurer Loftis stands proudly with them. In those affidavits, they refute the false accusations that have been hurled at them and hurled at Treasurer Loftis. They point out the inaccuracies of the Senate Finance Committee report. They refute the allegation that sensitive information was going to be recklessly disclosed. They affirm that all of the actions that they took and that the people in their office took were taken in good faith. You also didn't hear anything in the presentation about the Treasurer's report. This is a detailed and thorough report on what actually happened here across 4 state agencies. And that report is undisputed. We ask you to read the Treasurer's report if you haven't already. There is absolutely nothing in that report that supports removal of the Treasurer. Now, I know this sounds anticlimactic. It really does. One would think that this would all be over. We figured out this was an accounting journal entry. Let's move on. But that's not what's happened here. On January 15th, our fine governor issued a statement, and he said it best. He said, "There is no missing or stolen money. The Alex report confirms that there were, quote, unintended accounting mistakes made by different parties involved in state government's transition from an old accounting system to the new accounting system." And he also made a comment about that report.
Controversy escalated in recent days.
As long as we all work, communicate, collaborate, cooperate, and work for the people, and quit fighting among ourselves, I think we'll be just fine.
Governor Henry McMaster's.
Truer words have never been spoken. Members of the Senate, this is leadership. Yet here we are. When it became clear that Curtis Loftis would not walk away from the job he was elected to do, he received a notice of removal proceeding just 14 months shy of the primary. Now, ask yourselves, how could this happen? No right to call witnesses, no right to confront witnesses, no right to ask questions of any witnesses, no right to cross-examine anyone, no right to request documents prior to this hearing. Think about that. There are more than 1 million documents at issue, and he has been denied the right to see them. You know, as I was preparing for this hearing, I listened to an interview of one of the senators, and he said he was going to wait to hear what the evidence was. But unfortunately, members of the Senate, you are not allowed to hear any evidence in this proceeding because it was decided that this would not be a trial. This would be a political proceeding. There will be no witnesses. There will be no evidence, no exhibits, no proof, no expert witnesses, no due process. Many of you may know that in a real trial, the judge always tells the jury that what the lawyers say is not evidence. That is absolutely correct. What you heard from the presenters, that's not evidence. You heard conclusions, you heard accusations, you heard hyperbole, you heard supposition, you heard conjecture and assumptions, you heard words like, he should have known, must have been, it appears that. But evidence is proof that is legally presented in a proceeding through witnesses and records and exhibits and expert testimony or other tangible objects. And it's submitted for the purpose of persuading a judge or a jury about facts that are material to a case. In other words, evidence is anything that can be used to demonstrate the truth or falsity of something. What's interesting is that this started out apparently as a legal proceeding. There were hearings, people were put under oath, and people were called to testify in hearings. But a week before this hearing, we were informed this will not be a legal proceeding, it will be a political proceeding. Ask yourself, why is that? What do we know about the documents that were put up on the screen? Where'd they come from? Who created those charts? Are they accurate? Are they reliable? Members of the Senate, you should demand the answers to those questions to fulfill your oath. I've heard that the Senate prides itself in being a deliberative body. So I ask you, how do you properly deliberate without information and without due process? How can you deliberate when information is denied to you and is denied to the accused? In the folders provided by the treasurer, you have, among other things, 3 documents. You have requests for production of documents, you have interrogatories, you have requests for admissions. And these are materials that we sent prior to this hearing to ask for information to help us prepare and to help provide a defense for Curtis Loftis. You will also find letters from myself to the President of the Senate and also to the Clerk of the Senate requesting information, requesting documents. All of those requests were denied. How is there transparency in a process when Treasurer Loftis is denied basic information about the facts? Now you might say, well, he has the facts, but the fact of the matter is the conduct at issue occurred across 4 state agencies: the Department of Administration, the Auditor's Office, the Comptroller General's Office. He doesn't have access to that information. And let's talk for a minute just about the concept of the authentication of documents. In any courtroom, evidence is the cornerstone of justice. It is how facts are established, how truth is uncovered, how decisions are made. But before any document can be considered by a judge or a jury, it first must pass a critical legal threshold that we call authentication. In any courtroom, civil or criminal, if you want to introduce a bank record, you have to call a records custodian. And the record custodian takes the stand and you ask about the source of the documents, how it's maintained in the regular course of business, etc. If you want to introduce an email into evidence, you have to put forth the author of that email. And the author of that email takes the witness stand and verifies that he sent that email to these people and that this is the complete chain of the email. Authentication may seem like a mere formality, but it's not. It's a fundamental safeguard that ensures the integrity and the reliability of this process. But because there are no witnesses allowed in this proceeding, you have no way of knowing whether any of the documents you're shown by the presenters, by anybody, whether it's reliable, inherently trustworthy, whether it's accurate. Do you know whether when you see an email, it was the entire email chain? No, you do not. Do you know when you see a report, whether it's a truthful and accurate copy, whether you have all the exhibits to it? No, you don't. Do you know whether something was created with AI? No, you don't. Authentication is not a box to check. It's a safeguard for truth and for fairness and for the integrity of our system. And by assuring that every document that you see and that's presented is genuine, we protect not just the parties involved, but the entire foundation upon which justice is built. I urge you to remember that the Constitution was not written for times when it was easy to follow, but for times when it was hard to follow. For moments like this, for moments like this. The people of South Carolina deserve better than a process that mimics justice while denying its substance. They deserve transparency, fairness, and fidelity to the rule of law. Curtis Loftis deserves better than this. I want you to think for a moment about the man who is being subjected to this process, subjected to the accusations that you just heard, being called a liar, being called a criminal. Who is this that's being subjected to that? I'll tell you who he is. He's a guy whose family is originally from Inman, South Carolina, a mill town. He grew up right up the street in Lexington County, one of 6 children. He was the middle kid. He went to Brooklyn Casey High School and USC. His father was a World War II Army veteran and served this country for 30 years. And after he finished his service, he started a pest control company and a construction company. And in the mid-'80s, Curtis Loftis took over that pest control company, and he turned a one-office pest control company into a multi-million-dollar regional business, multi-million-dollar operation. And you know what he did after he experienced financial success? He started a faith-based charitable foundation to provide medical, nutritional, and housing services for the elderly and orphans. In 2010, Curtis Loftis could have done anything he wanted to do. He could have retired. He could have played golf every day. But instead, at the urging of his friends, who were aware of his immense talents, he decided to run for state treasurer to serve the citizens of South Carolina. And every day since then, he has faithfully and selflessly served this state for 15 years. If Treasurer Loftis is to be judged, let him be judged fairly. Not in a courtroom of politics, but under the light of constitutional integrity. The presenter showed you some video clips of him answering questions. But what they didn't tell you is that he was questioned for 6 hours at a time, and he was constantly during this process being accused of being incompetent, of being a liar, and of being a criminal. And I don't know about all of you, but I'll tell you, I'm not perfect. And we've all been in situations, probably, we could say, where we weren't at our best and we've fallen short. But can you imagine being called incompetent and being called a liar and being called a criminal while the cameras are rolling? And all the while, you know that the people who are accusing you know this is an accounting error, a journal entry error. If this removal is based on a personality conflict, line up, folks. You're going to be doing a lot of removing and a lot of impeaching in any proceeding. And I don't care whether you're in a courtroom or a Senate chamber. The search for truth is paramount. Whether in a criminal trial, in a civil dispute, or a family law matter. The goal of our justice system is to arrive at a fair and an accurate resolution based on the facts, not fiction. These fundamental rights are not privileges reserved for the powerful. They are constitutional rights guaranteed to every citizen, guaranteed, including public officials, no matter how inconvenient they might be for people who are in power. Those rights are not lost when you walk through these Senate chamber doors. This proceeding does not merely disregard the rights of one man. It disregards the voice of the electorate who placed their trust in him. If this body can nullify the will of the people without the protections of due process, then we must ask ourselves, who will be next? Is the Senate going to start down a road of removing constitutional officers who experience challenges in their position and don't handle them in a way that a senator in this body agrees with? If a hurricane evacuation leaves thousands of people stranded on I-26 and hospitals and nursing homes aren't seamlessly evacuated, are you going to move to remove the governor? Does he get to bring any witnesses? If South Carolina has test scores that rank in the bottom of the educational statistics, or in bottom of the rankings, are you going to remove the superintendent of schools? Is she in willful neglect? If the Attorney General of South Carolina loses an important case because one of his assistants loses a suppression hearing, is he in neglect? Are you going to seek to remove him? Senators, I respectfully submit to you that this is a dangerous road to go down. So I urge you to think carefully about how you proceed here. It will not stop at constitutional officers. Ask yourself, who amongst you will be next? Look to your left, look to your right. Who amongst of you will be next? Do you really want to get in a circular firing range? If this body chooses to go down that road, you will be moving down a slippery and a very dangerous slope. In the beginning of my remarks, I told you that this has never been done before in the history of South Carolina or in the history of the United States. Do you know why? Because in democratic societies, the removal of political leaders is supposed to follow a clear and legal process. Whether through impeachment, judicial review, or electoral defeat, there are procedures designed to ensure that leaders are held accountable without compromising the rule of law. History has shown us what can happen when those procedures are ignored, when accusations replace evidence, and politics override justice. We can all agree, I think we can all agree, that the standards we set for ourselves in the United States of America exceed that of Egypt, Pakistan, Burma, Thailand, Zimbabwe. These are examples of instances where leaders are ousted or politically neutralized without any semblance of due process. These removal actions lead to political instability, international condemnation, long-term damage to public trust in government. Democratic nations criticize these decisions for having lack of transparency and fairness, being an abuse of power, being politically motivated, being devoid of basic legal protections. Removing a leader without due process may achieve short-term political objectives for a few, but it carries a huge long-term cost. Mr. President, members of the Senate, the lesson from history is clear. Without due process, accountability turns into vengeance, and governance becomes a tool of power and not principle. Treasurer Loftis was expected to resign under pressure, He is not resigning. He will not quit on the people of South Carolina. More than 1 million voters put this man in office. Let him go back to work for the people of South Carolina to serve the citizens of this state. I urge this body to hold fast to the Constitution, not just when it's easy or advantageous, but when it tests our resolve. Let us show the people of South Carolina that this chamber respects not only the rule of law, but the spirit of fairness upon which that law is built. Let us proceed not with presumption, but with process, not with haste, but with principle, and not with disregard for constitutional rights, but with a deep and solemn respect for them. Show the people watching that in the chamber of the South Carolina Senate, there is courage to follow the oath you have all taken as senators, to preserve, to protect, and to defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States of America. Thank you.
President Alexander, Senators, my name's Sean Eubanks. I serve as Deputy General Counsel to the State Treasurer's Office. I'm going to be presenting a lot of evidence today, and you'll need to be looking at the screen more often than you'll need to look at me. So I want to get a few things out of the way right up front. First, Curtis Loftis never intentionally misled any member of this body or the public. There may have been times when he misspoke or made a mistake or became frustrated, but he never intended to mislead anyone on any point. Second, there are a lot of false narratives out there about this $1.8 billion accounting error, but I just want to be very clear. There is no lost money, no stolen money, no misappropriated money, no hidden bank account. The forensic audit completed this year by AlixPartners confirms that the entries that accumulated in this accounting ledger, Fund 993, were the result of an unfortunate error that had unintended and unexpected consequences. A mistake. 4 state agencies employing highly qualified, licensed accountants acting in good faith made an honest mistake. And finally, you've heard a lot about an alleged cover-up, and I'm here to tell you there was never any cover-up, but you don't have to believe me. I do ask that you please listen to the forensic auditors at AlixPartners who reviewed over 1 million documents in their investigation.
Just to make sure I understood your answer, he asked you about the possibility of any evidence of a cover-up, and it is my understanding that I thought I heard you say that you guys have not been able to come up with any kind of evidence of any kind of cover-up. Is that
That's
conversation
correct.
that you had? No. So my question would be, when you talk about evidence, you're talking about hard evidence. You aren't talking about perhaps there could be some circumstantial evidence out there. Well, I guess the question is, did you look into that to actually see if there was anything out there, circumstantial as well as hard evidence of any potential cover?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for asking. The majority of what we
gathered and reviewed came from the assistance of the Department of Admin in response to all the information that the governor's working group had gathered, as well as documents that we specifically requested. But in addition to that, just given the passage of time and the fact that a lot of people that were in those roles are no longer in those roles today, we also gathered emails. So we looked for emails around all of these key decision points. So when I say we didn't find evidence, it included looking at emails and communications around those time, and also speaking with, in some cases, we're actually able to speak with former employees as well. So we also did interviews, and through none of those avenues did we find those evidences of any cover-up.
The Senate presenters have been able to present you with unauthenticated evidence and testimony, clips of testimony that were never subject to cross-examination or rehabilitation or objections. And today I'm going to observe a higher standard. I will only present evidence to you today that is either authenticated by affidavit or testimony or is an official record with somebody's name on it. I will present testimony and affidavits from accountants and witnesses with firsthand knowledge. In other words, no speculating, only facts supported by evidence and testimony. You're going to hear the words fund and account a lot today. In every single context, these words refer to aspects of an accounting ledger. Skis Fund 993 is an accounting record. Not real dollars, not a bank account. These are numbers on a screen. The issues we're discussing today are important, but do not lose sight of this fact. There was not a single dollar in any bank account or investment account affected by these events. Now, allow me to tell you everything you want to know about Skis Fund 993. The Treasurer's Office conversion was an enormous collaborative project involving the Treasurer's Office, the Comptroller General's Office, the state auditor, the state's outside auditors, SAP, which is the company that created Skis, and outside consultants. The process officially began in 2015 and concluded in 2018, with the bulk of the work happening in 2016 and 2017. On May 26, 2016, the Comptroller General's Office excluded Fund 993 from the state's annual financial report. It was then called the ACFR, and now it's called, it was then called the CAFR, and now it's called the ACFR. The Comptroller General was and is solely responsible for issuing the ACFR. It's a report that includes not only Treasury resources, but resources from all over the state, colleges, universities, other entities. And if you could see in this email from the Comptroller General's Office staff, the CGO coded Fund 993 to be excluded from the ACFR. This document was not included in either of the subcommittee's reports, even though the Treasurer's Office provided it to them. And unfortunately, you'll hear me say that about quite a few documents today. Martin Taylor was a recipient of this email and authenticates it in his affidavit, which you have in your document packet. Mr. Taylor has been a licensed CPA for 35 years. He was directly involved in the Treasurer's Office conversion to Skis. He's now a retired Treasurer's Office employee, but thankfully he was willing to come forward and provide a sworn statement to the Senate. His affidavit confirms that the Treasurer's Office had no access or capability to exclude a fund from the ACFR, and that the Comptroller General's Office had ultimate authority on ACFR preparation. Here's why this matters. 2 years after this decision was made, Fund 993 held accounting entries totaling $1.8 billion, but those accounting entries have offsetting or negative counterparts in other Skis funds, in other places in the state's ledger. So at the end of each period, when the State Treasurer's Office goes to reconcile the bank ledgers to the bank statements, these entries net out to zero and don't affect the bank balance. The Treasurer's books reconcile to the bank. The Comptroller General's Office excluded the positive $1.8 billion in Fund 993, but was still counting all those other negative $1.8 billion in entries across other Skis funds throwing its ACFR calculations off by negative $1.8 billion. It'd be the same as if you wrote a $1 billion deposit in your checkbook account and then immediately wrote a $1 billion withdrawal across from it. By excluding Fund 993 from the ACFR, the Comptroller General's office was only ever counting the withdrawal, but not the positive entry that balanced it out. This action was early on in the timeline, but the Comptroller General's office was deeply involved in the Treasurer's office conversion and was aware of the balances in Fund 993 at all times. In fact, on November 2nd, 2017, the Comptroller General's office sent the State Treasurer's office a batch of conversion entries and directed the Treasurer's office to input them. Those entries left a $1.56 billion balance in Fund 993. I provided a copy of this email in your packets. On November 2nd, 2017, David Starkey of the Comptroller General's office emailed STO staffers Martin Taylor and Catherine Kipp. There's some jargon in this email, but essentially what he says is that he's providing a set of skis entries for the Treasurer's office staff to make for the skis conversion. Catherine Kipp, who was then a Treasurer's office employee, replies to Starkey's email and asks, "Are you sure this is only cash? Have we ascertained there are no other appropriations that need to be eliminated?" Starkey responds in under a minute and says, "Convert it now. All business areas need to be converted now." Martin Taylor's affidavit authenticates these documents and confirms that these entries left a $1.6 billion balance in Fund 993. Why does this matter? The Alex Partners report confirms that this matters. The Alex Partners audit has now revealed that, unbeknownst to anyone at the time, these CGO-directed entries had the effect of transferring non-cash appropriations into Fund 993 and counting those entries as cash. These ACFR business areas, also called 000 accounts because of their coding, are ledgers and skis that the CGO uses for various purposes. Only the Comptroller General's office, not the State Treasurer's office. The Comptroller General's office had previously recorded cash and appropriations in these ACFR business areas, and at some point, they failed to distinguish cash from appropriations recorded in these areas. And as shown in this email, the CGO directed the STO to move the non-cash entries into Fund 993, thinking that they were all cash. These critical emails were not included in the subcommittee's reports. The author of these emails, Mr. Starkey, is still employed with the Comptroller General's office and has never testified about these events. I do not intend to blame or villainize anyone today. In fact, my whole point today is that these were honest mistakes. But I've never met Mr. Starkey and certainly never questioned him about these events, and that's the problem. If you're going to pass judgment on these events, don't you need to hear him testify under oath? On March 5th, 2018, the Comptroller General's office determined that the $1.56 billion in Fund 993 should be recorded as a liability. Here again, we see an email from David Starkey of the Comptroller General's office. In this email, Mr. Starkey instructs Martin Taylor of State Treasurer's office to record the balance of Fund 993 into a liability account that the Comptroller General's office is setting up. Starkey even offers to make the entry himself, which I believe disproves the Senate presenter's claim that the Treasurer's office is the only entity that can touch this fund. But just to be clear, so we're all on the same page, this action is not moving money in a bank account. This is a general ledger liability account, an accounting record. No money is getting moved or hidden. And here's the sworn affidavit from Martin Taylor confirming STO recorded the $1.56 billion balance in Fund 993 per the CGO's directive. This accounting determination may seem inconsequential to some of you hearing it for the first time today, but there's been some suggestion that this was the moment everyone should have sounded the alarm. We should have known something was terribly wrong. The Alex Partners forensic auditors say that's not the case.
Was the obligation to notify the General Assembly triggered? And for me, it appears as if that was the point, but it sounds like you're suggesting that that perhaps I'm not accurate on that. But for me, that appeared to have been the triggering point. Do you disagree?
I don't know what they were thinking. As we looked at it, we believe those entries they were making, they thought they were making it to correct a problem, not create a problem or end up with a problem.
That $1.56 billion balance remained in Fund 993, recorded as a liability until October 26, 2018. On this date, the Comptroller General's Office directed the Treasurer's Office to move an additional $324 million into Fund 993, resulting in the final and familiar $1.85 billion balance. In this email, John Morrison of the Comptroller General's Office sends the Treasurer's Office a spreadsheet with conversion balances that he says need to be washed through the conversion account. Here's Martin Taylor's sworn testimony proving that STO made this transaction in Fund 993 at the request of the Comptroller General's Office. Why does this matter? Alex Partners tells us that these accounting entries directed by the CGO were incorrect. Had any of you seen this email before?
Senator McElveen, you asked a question in one of your hearings. Why did the treasurer add $324 million to the 1.5? And have you seen the email that we sent as why we did that? You would remember.
I've seen a lot of emails, but what the explanation was interest, correct?
No. The question you asked was, well, why would the treasurer put money into this account if he didn't know what the account was? We did it, and the email will show that the Comptroller General's Office specifically sent us an email saying, would you wash this $324 million through the conversion account? This is the account that now we understand that they've never heard of. But we have, and I'm sorry you don't have that email. Can somebody give him a copy of that email?
I probably got it.
We have that email.
I'm sure I've got
it. Okay.
We have all the members have that email at their desk.
But
right
it is, Senator, it is a lot of information, and it's arcane, and I understand it's easy to forget or easy to miss these things. But we inputted it. Our fingers were on the keys, but we were given that by the state's accountant. We listened to the state accountant. He is a complete check upon our office in the accounting.
Senators, this is a critical email. The Senate presenters indicated today that their staff have reviewed thousands upon thousands of documents. We don't have access to those. Do you? We don't have access to the documents that Alex Partners reviewed. In fact, this email on the screen is a 7-year-old email. What if we hadn't found it? What if our agency's retention policy had deleted it before we knew we needed it to defend our agency and our treasurer? The Senate presenters had this email sitting on their desks on April 2nd, 2024, and it's not in their interim report, and it's not in their final report. The video you just saw is from the Treasurer's testimony on April 2nd, 2024, before the Constitutional Budget Subcommittee. The subcommittee requested that the Treasurer come and present his agency's budget, a presentation that normally lasts 15 minutes. Instead, the Treasurer was questioned for over 6 hours about a broad range of topics spanning from his campaign promises to statutory interpretation to granular accounting and investment concepts. And as you know, he was asked in this hearing whether entries in Ski's Fund 993 represented real cash. An unequivocal yes would have certainly been justified at the time. The Comptroller General had written the Treasurer saying, "It's cash." The state's official financial statement to the world included it as cash. The state auditor wrote a letter to Senator Grooms saying, "It's cash." So on April 2nd, 2024, Treasurer Curtis Loftis also said, "It's cash," but that's not all he said.
When you say you need to test it, I know you've mentioned that a couple times in response to some other senators today, but explain again what that means by testing it.
Yeah, the Comptroller General's office and the State Auditor's office and Clifton Larson all have reached a level of confidence that this money exists and it should be in the general fund. And we don't say that's not the case, but we really don't have a say. Now, if they ask me for a say, I'm going to say, because I'm cautious, let's test it. Let's make sure.
The Treasurer made it abundantly clear to the subcommittee that he was relying on the independent professional opinions of the Comptroller General, the State Auditor, and the state's outside auditors at Clifton Larson Allen. This video illustrates an important point. The clips that you've seen of the Treasurer's testimony are just clips. They lack the broader context of the testimony. The Senate presenters gave you sound bites in which the Treasurer is essentially being cross-examined without a lawyer to object. And so I've asked you today, can you, in good faith, decide to remove a constitutional officer based on sound bites? The General Assembly decided to engage an audit firm to conduct a forensic accounting review of all cash and investments held in the state treasury, not just Fund 993. In 2024, the state hired Alex Partners LLP to take on this task. On January 15th, 2025, the results of the forensic audit are published in a report, and really it's good news for the state. There's no secret bank account, no missing or hidden money. The Treasurer's books reconcile to the bank. In fact, the Alex Partners' one recommendation for the Treasurer's office, reconciling by agency and by Ski's Fund, the Treasurer's office had already started doing. Alex Partners concludes that $1.6 billion of the balance in this fund does not represent real cash. It's appropriations which the Comptroller General's office directed the State Treasurer's office to move into Ski's Fund 993. Alex Partners also concludes that the Treasurer's books balance now, and they will continue to balance when the incorrect entries are reversed. You are reading that correctly. The bank balances in Ski's will remain the same and continue to reconcile to the bank statements. I've given you all an affidavit from Melissa Simmons, the head of investments and Treasury Management Division at the Treasurer's office. She's been a CPA for 30 years. She's been at the Treasurer's office for 9 years. She confirms under oath when the Comptroller General's office makes the entries in Ski's as recommended by Alex Partners, the net change to the general ledger bank balances will be zero. As for the remaining $245 million, AlixPartners says it's cash and it's included in the bank balances. You may be asking yourself, how is it possible that the $1.8 billion accounting error could have no net effect on the treasurer's ability to balance to the bank? And if you'll recall, I showed you this table earlier. The incorrect entries that created a positive balance in Fund 993 also created negative entries in other skis funds, and they canceled each other out. So when the entries are reversed, the positive $1.6 billion in Fund 993 and the negative $1.6 billion in the other skis funds will go away. AlixPartners reviewed more than 1 million documents and did not find a single piece of evidence suggesting wrongdoing by the treasurer. I've included this handout in your packet to address some of the false narratives you've probably heard about this $1.8 billion. I hope you'll look at it closely and consider what it says. We've got a little bit more accounting to discuss, because before we move from the topic, I want to address the troubling claims made in the subcommittee's final report that the state's financial records are in shambles. I've provided you all a copy of an affidavit by Melissa Simmons. It's in your packet. Please read it. She's been an accountant for over 30 years, and her affidavit gives a thorough accounting explanation and response to the subcommittee's allegations. If you want to know about the quality of the Treasurer's Office books, read our audits. For the last 7 years, the auditor's report to management has not made a single finding regarding the Treasurer's Office. You've heard over and over before today and then today that the Treasurer took active steps to release sensitive financial information or invited cyber attacks. I even heard some things I had not heard before today in the Senate presenter's presentation. The documents and evidence tell a different story. They suggest that, or prove, frankly, that the treasurer had reason to believe the subcommittee wanted him to release this particular report, the skis fund by agency by fund report, and so he took steps to do so securely and safely, and then was told it could not be done. In the April 2nd, 2024 subcommittee hearing, which was to be a budget hearing, the subcommittee questioned the treasurer at length about SC Code 115120, suggesting that this statute required the publication of a report that shows treasury cash by skis fund rather than a list of all the banks and all the deposits in each bank, as had been done for decades prior. The treasurer told the committee that this had never been the treasurer's office interpretation of this statute, and he warned the committee that releasing that much detail to the public would be incredibly risky, and that before he released the report, he would consult with the Department of Administration, Skis Division, and the Secret Service who investigate bank fraud. I do want to be clear here that this report did not contain bank account numbers, as was alleged earlier. I provided an affidavit to you all from Clarissa Adams, the Treasurer's Office Chief of Staff. She testifies under oath that on April 3rd, the day after this hearing, the Treasurer directed her to contact the Department of Administration to assess the risk of posting this information, and Clarissa Adams did exactly that. She and Marcia Adams from the Department of Administration discussed the matter, and the Treasurer's Office awaited her response. The email is on the screen, and it's never been provided to you in any report by the subcommittee. The following day, the treasurer sent out 2 letters to the subcommittee. The first letter informed the subcommittee that the treasurer's office would begin posting the requested report on the treasurer's website. You heard a Senate presenter claim that this letter declared the information be released at noon. And to that I say, read the letter for yourself. It's not true. There was also an assertion earlier that the treasurer claimed this letter was fabricated. I'm not familiar with that claim. And you weren't presented with any evidence of it either. 2 hours after this first letter went out, the treasurer sent another letter clarifying that we were working towards securing a secure means of posting the report. Ultimately, Marcia Adams at DOA provided a letter which confirmed this report should not be released. But really, what matters is this. There was no directive to release this information. There was no attempt to release this information. And ultimately, it was not released. There's some suggestion about the treasurer's method of issuing debt. The treasurer and the governor have the joint authority to issue bond anticipation notes. But the only reason that these bond anticipation notes are raised as an issue is because the Senate presenters have named a failure to issue a particular kind of report as a grounds for removal. And senators, it may concern you to hear that the subcommittee's final report was the first time the treasurer's office was ever informed of concerns about the manner in which debt was reported. In fact, when Curtis Loftis entered office in 2011, he immediately instituted the issuance of an annual debt report to create greater transparency around the state's borrowing. It's an incredibly detailed report. It's available on the Treasurer's Office website. I encourage you to take a look at it. This one for this year is about 40 pages. The Treasurer's Office has never attempted to hide anything from the Senate or the public regarding debt issuances, period. And last, the issue of federal housing interest. The senators present this issue of applying interest to federal funds, and of course they attribute the blame entirely to the treasurer, but the truth of the matter is this was a strange situation that presented a genuine legal question. In 2021, South Carolina Housing Authority requested a SKIS fund be set up to account for federal money, but it did not ask the Comptroller General's office to code the fund to retain its own interest. As such, the money was invested and the interest went to the general fund instead of accruing to that SKIS fund. Years later, the government notified the Housing Authority that it was owed interest. Nobody questioned that the money needed to be paid to the federal government, but this raised a genuine question of who had the authority to move money out of the general fund to fix this. Had the money already been appropriated for something else? In the email on your screen, you can see the Comptroller General's office suggested that moving the money in itself at this point might be an appropriation requiring some action by the General Assembly. The Treasurer's Office researched this issue and discovered a statute which allows the Attorney General and Governor to direct an appropriation when it's not clear how an appropriation is to be paid. And so we wrote a letter. The Treasurer's Office wrote this letter to the Attorney General and the Governor and asked them for direction. Unfortunately, the Attorney General declined to provide direction regarding the matter at that time. Thankfully, Senator Davis wrote the Attorney General again and made the same request pursuant to the same statute. The Attorney General responded directly to the Treasurer, giving direction that the interest was to be applied. I've got these excerpts of the Attorney General's opinion on the screen because I want you to see there's a great deal of discussion about applying broad interpretations to appropriations. A lot of probablys and we believes. And I'm not at all criticizing the Attorney General's office. In fact, we're grateful for his assistance in this matter. But this letter proves that the question answered in this Attorney General's opinion was not the cut and dried issue the Senate presenters just told you it was. Regardless, the conclusion to this story is that the Treasurer's office applied the interest in accordance with the Attorney General's advice. I want to end today by acknowledging something that I hope I've already made clear by my actions. I'm proud to work at the State Treasurer's office. I'm proud to work for Curtis Loftis. It is an honor to stand up in his defense today. And as you've seen from the affidavits submitted to you, affidavits from talented professionals, licensed professionals, I'm not the only one who wanted to stand up for Curtis Loftis. The Senate presenters have made every effort to show you the Treasurer at his worst. But I see him at work every day, and I know him to be a decent, honorable, honest man. If he wasn't, I wouldn't work for him. And neither would Melissa Simmons or Jackie Hypes or Karen Ingram. If Treasurer Loftis wasn't an honest man, Martin Taylor would not have come forward from retirement to submit testimony in the Treasurer's defense. Curtis Loftis cares about the state. He cares about the people who live here. And this job, the office of State Treasurer, means more to him than you can imagine. The subcommittee's final report calls on the Inspector General and SLED to come investigate the State Treasurer's office. After we received the subcommittee's report and read it, the Treasurer and I personally went to meet with Inspector General Lampkin and Chief Mark Keel. We offered them any information they wanted. The Treasurer assured them they would have the keys to our office if they so desired. Their responses were the same. There's no investigation. There's no investigation because there's no missing money, no stolen money, no misspent money, and no cover-up. So after everything you hear today, my question to you is this: can you, in good conscience, remove Curtis Loftis from office? Can you substitute your will above the will of the voters because of some video clips, some sound bites? What if you're wrong? Thank you for allowing me to present today.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I come here not because I want to, or not because I'm required to, but because I want to. I wanted this opportunity to speak to the full membership of the Senate for over a year. So I'm thankful this time. I came as an elected public servant who remains steadfast in my commitment to the office I've held since 2011. Over the last 18 months, I've endured accusations by subcommittee determined to force my resignation by public ridicule. I think I was called a liar 12 times that I could count today. And I have to think that that's unprecedented, but it happens to me with this group constantly. I've been chastised and degraded. I assure you that I remain resolute. I will not turn my back on the voters who elected me. I will not betray their trust. I took an oath, and I intend to follow it. For 14 years, I've served proudly as your state treasurer. It's a role of immense responsibility and great personal satisfaction. Each day, I safeguard and invest the taxpayers' money, striving always to uphold the public trust with honor and integrity. Last night, that sum was approximately $45 billion, and that doesn't count $7 billion in the 529 fund. So as you can see, we're by far the largest bank in the state, and it's a significant responsibility. I've been elected 4 times with overwhelming support. The public trust has not wavered with this contrived controversy, and neither has my commitment. I'm proud of the partnerships we forged with other constitutional officers, agencies, and state employees. Together, we built a foundation of physical strength that supports South Carolina's growth and prosperity. Some have sought to weaponize this issue by allowing this era to take on a life of its own. They've allowed the complexity of this issue to overwhelm most observers, the press, and elected officials. But I'm not confused. This accounting issue is being used by some as a lever against me and the voters I represent. I've studied great men and women in history that have stood up to the establishment, stood up to the status quo. From Martin Luther King to Alfred Dreyfus to my friend Donald Trump, they've all been repeatedly investigated and attacked because they stood up to the establishment. I mentioned President Trump not to stir a partisan debate because my list was actually much longer, but I had to cull it. So I had folks of all stripes. I want to make a simple point that standing your ground in the face of political adversity is not an act of defiance. It's an act of courage, and it's done by people on the left and on the right. Before Mr. Trump entered his 2016 race, I hosted him in Charleston at a national convention of state treasurers and auditors. He seemed not to have a care in the world until he became a candidate, and then he became the president. And still, since then, he's been investigated by the federal and state authorities, prosecuted by political opponents, and put on trial for allegations that he and millions of Americans believe are part of a broader effort to silence and sideline him. And again, I don't use him for partisan reasons. I use him because he's current, and we've seen it. I stood proudly with President Trump as I have with others, as I would have with others that I've mentioned. He frequently denounced investigations of him. Through it all, President Trump did not back down. He did not resign. He did not cave to pressure. He kept his mission. He stood before the American people and said, "They're not coming after me. They're coming after you. I'm just in the way." I'm inspired by President Trump, and I too will not back down. I realize my burdens are absolutely nothing like those of Martin Luther King, Alfred Dreyfus, and Donald Trump. But the lessons learned from their struggles are enlightening and encouraging. As I travel around South Carolina, and I've done a lot of that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I find very few people of any party, of any race, and of any income status that believe this accounting error should cause a statewide election to be overturned. In fact, I've been overwhelmed and frankly very surprised by the positive attitude to this issue by virtually everyone that's outside the political bubble. A well-respected former Democrat senator said it best in a podcast last week, "It's a whole lot of nothing." and it's clear that most South Carolinians agree. His words remind me of why we're here, and I want to speak plainly about the most significant matter before us. The committee has alleged that I knowingly made false statements regarding the now widely discussed $1.8 billion accounting error, claiming I knowingly misrepresented it as cash in Skis Fund 0993. Let me be clear, that allegation is false. When I answered questions on April the 2nd, I relied upon documentation from the Comptroller General, the state's chief accountant, the state auditor, and our external audit firm, Clifton, Larson, and Allen, all of whom stated that the $1.8 billion was real cash and appropriately recorded in Fund 0993. These statements were consistent with the state's financial records, including the annual comprehensive financial report and the previous Senate subcommittee report of 2023. I answered in good faith with the best information possible. That information, as we've since learned from Alex Partners, was inaccurate. But my reliance on the Comptroller General's letter was appropriate and expected. As the state's treasurer, I'm entitled to rely on those financial records, including when we issue hundreds of millions of dollars of bonds and managing the $52 billion last night of public money. So clearly, relying on those records in a subcommittee hearing was appropriate. There was no intent to deceive, and furthermore, there was no reason to deceive. I answered the question with the best information available from the most credible source possible. I'm guided by faith, perseverance, and commitment to the people of South Carolina. I regret that this issue has become politicized and contentious. I regret that my passion to defend my staff, my office, and the voters may have heightened tensions already present. My passion for fighting what I perceive to be injustice may have been inappropriate, but my intent was always to do the honorable thing, the faithful thing. I realize at times that my actions may have fallen short of expectations, and I will endeavor to do a better job in meeting them in the future. Senators, all of you, I think it's important that we move forward and end the politics of contentiousness surrounding this accounting error and focus on our public service. I hope this opportunity for the full membership to be briefed on the facts will be beneficial, and hopefully we will agree that very hard lessons have been learned, that policies and procedures across state government have been changed, and that a more obliging approach is needed by our financial agencies. We hope you'll come to our office. I hope you'll come visit. I hope you'll talk to our professionals. We'll wheel you around and show you the vault and the computer terminals where we purchase hundreds of millions of dollars of assets on a regular basis. I'm ready to do as Governor McMaster said, to spend more time communicating, cooperating, and collaborating. I hope all of us in this room agree that we should rise above the moment and return our focus to what's matter, serving the people of South Carolina with honor and respect and purpose. I want to thank you, and may God bless each and every one of you and the people of this state. Thank you.
Request to take a stand at ease momentarily. Will recede with Senator from Edgefield. What purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I ask that we take a 10-minute break.
Senate will recede for 10 minutes. the committee of the whole please come back to order? I would ask members to be at their seats as we continue with the presentation of the Treasurer and Counsel. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members of the Senate, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Before I get into the details of my presentation, I think it's important that I make one point very clear. Ms. Barbier and Mr. Eubanks and I, we do not simply represent Treasurer Loftis in this hearing this afternoon. We represent every single South Carolina citizen that voted for Curtis Loftis to be their state treasurer in the 2022 general election cycle. All 1,129,961 South Carolina citizens. Why, you might ask? Because today, this afternoon, in this chamber, you are essentially being asked to disregard those citizens' vote. You're being asked to tell those citizens that their vote does not matter, that their vote for Curtis Loftis for treasurer is irrelevant. You're being asked to do damage to a fundamental principle of American democracy, that the will of the people decide elections, not elected officials. It is one of the most cherished, most important principles of American democracy. Men and women, far greater than you and I, have risked their lives, have spilt their blood, and have given their lives for that very fundamental principle of American democracy. The will of the people decide elections, not elected officials. And the irony of it is, a significant percent of the South Carolina citizens that voted for Curtis Loftis for treasurer in 2022 and in 2018 and in 2014 and in 2010 voted for each and every single one of you senators. Sitting in your chairs, behind your desks, in this chamber, right here, right now. Think about the logic. And for all of you senators that represent a majority Republican district, the logic goes further. Over the last 4 election cycles, almost every single one of you senators representing a majority Republican district, almost every one of your voters that voted for you to be their senator, to be their representative on this floor, in this chamber, voted for Curtis Loftis to be their state treasurer. How do you go back home to the citizens of your district and tell them, your vote for me, Your vote for you to be their state senator matters. It is relevant. It will always be counted. But your vote for Curtis Loftis to be their state treasurer does not matter. Is not relevant. Will not be counted. How do you do that? How do you think the voters in your district would feel if an elected government official, through his or her agency, who had the power and authority, wanted to remove you from office, from this very chamber, without legal due process, without a fair and meaningful hearing, without credible evidence? How do you think your voters would feel? They'd be mad. They'd be angry. They'd be frustrated. They'd be disillusioned. And rightfully so. Put another way, how would each and every one of you senators feel? How would you feel if an elected official in his or her agency in Columbia with the legal authority was trying to remove you from office, was trying to throw you out of this Senate chamber without legal due process, without a fair and meaningful hearing, without credible evidence? Each and every one of you would be mad. You would be angry. You would be frustrated. You would be disillusioned. And rightfully so. Do you really want to go down this path that these presenters are leading you? Do you really want to go down this path today? Do you really believe in your heart of hearts that disenfranchising the will of 1,129,961 of your fellow South Carolinians is the right thing to do? Is the moral thing to do? Is good for the state and the people of South Carolina? Is a dignified act? Do you really believe that? I want to touch on a few of Ms. Barbier's extremely relevant points. First, the rule of law. You senators are being encouraged to literally go down a path that no man or no woman in the history of the South Carolina Senate has ever traveled. Think about the monumental decision that you have to make here this afternoon. You're being asked to remove a 4-time duly elected statewide constitutional officer, and to do so without any meaningful legal due process, without any opportunity for him to call witnesses on his behalf, without any opportunity for him or his lawyers to cross-examine witnesses. The right to cross-examine witnesses is the most sacred right of the rules of criminal procedure, because it allows an American citizen to question those individuals that are accusing him or her of significant violations. You're also being asked to do this without hearing from any live accounting or financial experts other than what was played for you with AlixPartners, and I will get to that. Because remember, AlixPartners is the expert witness for this chamber. David Bly, who led the team of accountants and auditors for Alex Partners, was not hired by the Treasurer's Office, was not personally hired by Curtis Loftis. He was hired at the request of the General Assembly, South Carolina House, and the South Carolina Senate, to get to the bottom of what happened and to make recommendations. Think about what has not occurred during this 2-year Senate subcommittee investigation. There has been no FBI criminal investigation. There has not even been an FBI inquiry. There's been no federal bank regulators investigating the Treasurer's Office. The Attorney General has a fraud division. There has been no open investigation or inquiry in the Attorney General's fraud division. The Attorney General has a public corruption division. There has been no investigation or inquiry opened with the Attorney General's public corruption division. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you know this. Covering up an investigation involving state finances is a crime. It's called obstruction of justice. Because this state receives federal funds, it is a federal crime and a state crime, which is why I mentioned no FBI investigation, no federal bank regulators have been combing around Columbia. There has been no SLED investigation. There has been no Inspector General investigation. Even after the Senate subcommittee's report was delivered to Chief Mark Keel and General Brian Lampkin, two men that I know personally, who I have worked with during my tenure as the Deputy Solicitor here in Richland County and in the United States Attorney's Office, including the 13 months I was your United States Attorney between Strom Thurmond Jr. and Reggie Lloyd. Each and every one of you senators knows how serious Mark Keel and the State Law Enforcement Division is when it comes to public officials being held accountable, when it comes to allegations of obstruction of justice. You may not know General Lampkin the way I know Jim. He was the special agent in charge of the FBI when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He left South Carolina and rose through the ranks of the FBI. Brian Lampkin, particularly in his role as Inspector General, takes very seriously any allegation, any accusation that a public official who is charged with the public trust, particularly the treasurer, who is South Carolina's state banker, charged with the fiduciary responsibilities of money belonging to South Carolina citizens. He takes those allegations seriously. Yet, despite the subcommittee report being delivered to the State Law Enforcement Division and the Inspector General's office, no preliminary inquiry was opened. No investigation was started. They don't consider this a serious matter as far as they are concerned. The bottom line is this. You senators this afternoon are being asked to remove Curtis Loftis as treasurer of the state of South Carolina, a 4-time elected constitutional officer, without any due process and despite the will of 1,129,961 of your fellow South Carolina citizens, based on a standard that does not even rise to the level of probable cause to arrest somebody for shoplifting. or a bad check. I've been told that there are 16 to 17 lawyers that are members of this esteemed body. Of course, I recognize most of you as I stare out at this chamber. You are being asked to remove an elected constitutional officer based on a standard in which law enforcement could not arrest a South Carolina citizen for stealing a candy bar. That's what you're being asked to do. What does the evidence show? There's no money missing. There has been no money misappropriated. There has been no money stolen. There was never any scheme to defraud. There was never any cover-up. There has never been a secret fund. All of those statements were accusations and allegations in the public domain for months and months and months. And all of those allegations and all of those accusations were and are false. They're false. We all now know the 4 agencies that were involved in this process: the Department of Administration, the State Treasurer's Office, the State Auditor's Office, and the Comptroller General's Office, as well as this body, as well as the South Carolina House. We all now know, based mostly on AlixPartners' thorough investigation, thorough accounting and auditing, and their final report. This was an accounting error that started with an erroneous journal entry in the Comptroller General's ledger when the State Treasurer's Office and the Comptroller General's Office were undergoing a comprehensive conversion of their computer software systems. That's what AlixPartners found. That's what they stand by. Even Governor McMaster and his legal team and his financial team agrees. Now, some of the points that Sean Eubanks discussed with you, I'd like to just touch on 1 or 2. And remember this, not only was AlixPartners hired by the General Assembly, it is an internationally acclaimed, prominent accounting and auditing firm. AlixPartners have no friends to reward in their findings and in Mr. Bly's testimony. No friends to reward and no enemies to punish. You can't get anything more credible than that for you senators in making these serious determinations. AlixPartners confirmed that the error started in the Comptroller General's office, and they were able to track the confluence of errors and mistakes over a 4-year period involving the 4 state agencies that I discussed before. AlixPartners determined that there was no willful, intentional, or malicious wrongdoing by Treasurer Loftis, any member of his staff, or by any other agency or their staff. They found that there was no evidence of a cover-up by Treasurer Loftis or his staff. We played that video of Senator Jackson asking Mr. Bly a very important, a very credible, and a very competent direct question. Did your investigation find any evidence whatsoever, direct or circumstantial, and I'm paraphrasing, that there is a cover-up, and he's talking about with Treasurer Loftis and the State Treasurer's Office. And you heard Mr. Bly's response. Again, paraphrasing. Their entire investigation, through all of their interviews, through all of the emails they checked, through all of the documents they looked at, through all of their accounting, through all of their auditing practices, there was no cover-up by the treasurer or anyone in his office. And yet, certain individuals, including Senator Goldfinch, after Mr. Bly's testimony at the subcommittee meeting, and after all of the other information was reviewed and it was determined by all individuals involved, there is no evidence of a cover-up. There was no evidence of a cover-up 2 years ago. There was no evidence of a cover-up a year ago. There was no evidence of a cover-up by Treasurer Loftis or anyone in his staff 6 months ago, 5 months ago, 4 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, 1 month ago. This morning when the sun rose, when the two senators were given their presentation, and as I stand before you members of the South Carolina Senate, there never has been, there never was, and there never will be evidence of a cover-up. And yet Senator Goldfinch and several others, even after Mr. Bly's testimony, and even after it was absolutely uncontradicted, there is no evidence of a cover-up. He was interviewed by members of the media multiple times, which you can find on various social media networks, particularly YouTube. And he was asked multiple times by these members of the media about that very allegation. And despite Mr. Bly's testimony, despite the final report, despite all relevant individuals involved in this investigation indicating, many swearing under oath, there is no evidence of a cover-up. Senator Goldfinch and other individuals have consistently stated in answer to questions from reporters, Curtis Loftis is guilty of covering up his actions and the actions of his office. We've all seen him. We've all heard it. And then what happened? He took the floor of this Senate chamber earlier today. And at least 10 to 12 times, with his voice rising, with indignation in his delivery, he accused the sitting treasurer, a constitutional officer, of lying. He used that word, lying. He called him a liar. Not once, not twice, at least 10 to 12 times. He stood on solemn ground in front of his colleagues and used that word repeatedly. Now, other than quoting, Mr. President, Madam Senators, and other senators, I'm not going to use that word when I describe and put this in context. Between my parental upbringing, my schooling, the mentors, both in my personal and professional life, my interpretation of the American Bar Association's rules of professional responsibility, I simply don't find that word dignified. I don't believe it's civil. I don't believe it's professional. I don't believe it's courteous. These are serious matters And as adults, we should all be able to have discussions civilly, with respect for each other. We should show each other common courtesy. We should embrace the values of what it is to be a South Carolinian. But he stood before you and he repeatedly called Curtis Loftis that word. But think about this. I ask you to think about this for a moment. He knows, and we know, that all of the evidence that you have read and seen during the course of this investigation, during the course of the subcommittee's report, and the evidence that you saw on those two screens today, when Senator Jackson asked David Bly the question, the lead investigator, is there any evidence, direct or circumstantial, any evidence that the treasurer or anyone in his office covered up? And unequivocally, the answer to Senator Jackson's question was no. There is no evidence of any cover-up. Yet, in interviews with multiple journalists, multiple times over the last several weeks, after this Senate